listening to C-Suite Unplugged, a podcast by the Business Council of Alberta, where the province's top executives share their career story, what's happening at their companies, and speak candidly about the most pressing business issues. I'm your host, Adam Legge, and in each episode, I sit down with Alberta's leading CEOs, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders to explore their path to the top and what they're focused on right now. Enjoy the show. Today's guest is a seasoned techpreneur who's spent the last several years helping organizations deploy artificial intelligence to automate, optimize, and drive measurable results in their operations. He's built and scaled companies from the ground up, starting with co-founding Investopedia and growing it to one of the world's most trusted financial education platforms, and now leads one of Canada's top applied AI companies. In this episode of C-Suite Unplugged, I'm joined by Cory Janssen, co-founder and CEO of AltaML, an applied AI company based in Edmonton. In our conversation, we dive into Cory's entrepreneurial journey, what he's learned about leading companies over time, the current AI craze, and what it will take for Alberta to fully leverage AI to drive productivity, competitiveness, and long-term economic growth. Cory, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here.
Cory, let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up? What was your early life like? And tell us about young Cory in his early days.
I am Edmonton born and raised. One of those guys that I grew up on the south side of Edmonton and moved a few times between that and U of A and still live on the south side. So of the 4 or 5 places I've lived, they're all within 10 square kilometers. So not that exciting, but my parents were always entrepreneurs and had a number of businesses over the years. And so it was really shaped around their experiences of running small companies and frankly, the National Energy Plan and basically them being, they never formally committed bankruptcy, but essentially were bankrupt. So it's very much an Albertan story in terms of the roller coaster that we have here around energy. And even though we weren't directly in energy, having businesses that were essentially put under in the early 80s.
Yeah, I mean, so much in Alberta is tied to, as goes the energy sector, so goes everything else in many ways, right? So did that influence what you wanted to do as a career to maybe do something different that wouldn't be as tied to the energy sector?
Well, big time, because my parents owned, essentially it was a swag company. I mean, we called it, it was light manufacturing back then, but, making jackets and hats and cresting and that type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so my father, remember him telling the story about how after he graduated from his class in business at the U of A, how he was one of the most successful guys in his class, and he had a year or two in, I don't know, 70 or 80 employees or whatever it was. And within 6 weeks, the TD came and, seized everything, and sales literally went to zero, right? And so from that though, he was trying to figure out a way to make a go of it. And there was this weird new device called the Macintosh. Oh, yes. And so at one point he was then, working for someone else and trying to get back on his feet and bought a few of these things and had 10 of them in his trunk. And he told this story about how, he brought in a few business connections and saw who would actually buy one of these things and then sold them all in one night and said, maybe this whole new computer thing, maybe there's something here. So that evolved, and he was like a consultant and worked alongside my mother and was putting in, there used to be a company called Novell, which was the big operating system company of the time. And so he would put in Novell networks everywhere and literally running cable and doing all that, and eventually got into the IT training business. And so from that, when I was 14 and 15, when they had an extra spot for training, I got to sit in. And so during the summers and that, and so when I was, 16 years old, I was the youngest Microsoft certified systems engineer in the country, and that because I was taking all this stuff of how to build a web server in the early days. So think this is the mid 90s, right? And so was very fortunate that the ending of the businesses in manufacturing kind of created opportunity in terms of technology, and I had I was very lucky to have that education even while I was going through high school and before university.
That's an amazing story. And so technology literally is from part of your DNA as a family and now into your career and what you've been doing ever since.
Yeah, exactly. It was, and getting into that, the offline training, and this was the early days of the internet, the online training, and that was part of the inspiration. So I did my, first company that I co-founded, Investopedia, and so all those things kind of tied together. So, but I really do think that those conversations around the dinner table and understanding, the life of an entrepreneur, that really a small business person, right? That I think is, and maybe the distrust of certain last names in Ottawa and what they can do when there aren't the right policies that hurt our province.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll get into a little bit more of the journey, but let's talk about what was, if you weren't sitting getting your Microsoft engineer certificate at age 16, what was the first job that you had that provided a paycheck, and what did you learn from that first job?
So I worked for my parents in a lot of the jobs. The only real job I've ever had was bagging groceries at Safeway. And well, I did flyers and the regular stuff like that when you're a teenager, but I worked at Safeway just long enough to learn more about how much unions take off your paycheck. So maybe a slightly, again, as a teenager going in and realizing, I don't remember what minimum wage was back then, but I do remember those first few paychecks and how little of it actually came through because you had to pay all your union dues. So I did not last long at Safeway, right? And so I was maybe unemployable then and continue to be unemployable today. So if I can't figure it out on my own, I'm probably in trouble.
Well, that a lot of people take from first jobs things like hard work and showing up on time. You were about, I don't want to pay union dues for the rest of my life. That's pretty funny. Well, people do love to hear the story of an executive's and entrepreneur's journey. So let's put you at a point in time. It's young Cory. You've got your university degree in hand. You've got the whole world in front of you. Where did you go from university and to the point where you are CEO of AltaML today?
Actually, it started during university. So a good friend of mine, Corey Wagner, and myself, we both met playing hockey together for Southside Athletic Club in Edmonton. And as I took a gap year doing a bunch of this, working for my parents, and I had a bunch of this training in IT. And remember, this was the peak of the .com boom.
Sort of, late
90s. Late 90s, right?
Yeah,
late 90s. And so we wanted to start something with .com on the end of it. Because the way you became rich was you started anything with .com, right?
Exactly.
And so we actually had a whole bunch of different ideas. We had 4 or 5 different websites that we started, but the main one was this, financial education site, Investopedia, that, we actually didn't even think it was being a big one. We just said we were both stock geeks.
Yep.
I can remember we were studying at Students Union building at the U of A, and we'd go out for a beer afterwards to Rat, the local bar, and sketched out the biggest, baddest investment website we could think of, and that was our beer conversation. And then the next day, in a more sober light, we found that maybe we don't have all the resources to do all these pieces, but if we just started on this education side of it, we could write that ourselves. So we started writing dictionary terms and writing, educational articles. I put my life savings into building a web server. And then hosting it on it. And we kind of threw up a bunch of these websites, and it didn't take off immediately, but over time, and people forget this, and especially younger kids right now, this is before social media. Yep. This is before Google dominated everything and kind of destroyed the rest of the, online publishing, right? We were, in fact, the way people found websites was on traditional media. So one day we were the cool website of the day on CNBC. And we can remember, and traffic then just spiked up, and it was just, the traffic kept on going up and up and up. And then I went to my father, the next year, and he said, well, you should start a company. Right. And so.
And you're still in university?
Yeah, this was, before I started, this was first year university. So we incorporated February of 2000. So the peak of the NASDAQ was March. So auspicious timing, right? I like to say, we never raised venture capital money. Well, there wasn't any VC money, and no one was giving money to 19-year-old, 20-year-old kids. Yeah. We scrimped and we wrote a business plan. We took it to the bank, and I can always remember we spent all this time working on this great business plan, and they said, well, this is great. And now, Mr. Janssen, we'd like you to sign this. And it wasn't to me, it was to my dad. Sign this guarantee we had a $20,000 line of credit. And that's basically what we used to start the whole company. So I think we got it at worst down to 18 grand into line of credit and started getting positive cash flow. And, just we'd do websites on the side, anything to just generate cash flow. And so it was, I think in the end, it was actually a great lesson to start off of not having capital and just forcing to, corner store type accounting, right? How much is coming in, right? And So I did graduate with a degree. I mean, I joke about being on the 5-year program. I didn't get a master's. I kind of like, we basically worked through university and I probably spent more time, eventually we got a small 420 square foot office space in downtown Edmonton. And so I'd go back and forth on the LRT and there's a big pole right in the middle of it, right? Where like, this is the type of space you couldn't rent to anybody else. And Investopedia kept on growing, eventually became one of the largest financial websites, one of the largest websites on the planet. And then we sold it to Forbes in the late 2000s.
Wow.
After that point, I was happily managing capital, did not want to get back into operating businesses, but found that the unit economics for these type of sites worked really well. So it was timeless content. So every time you produce a piece, like compare that to like the news, right? Where you might see something on the evening news and it's good for a 24-hour period or whatever. Well, when we defined EBITDA, or wrote an article on that, right? It was like an annuity. Like you'd continue to have that traffic, would be just as good a year or two from now as it was.
As evergreen.
Exactly, right? And evergreen content. And so made a bunch of angel investments to start partners with others in traditional industries. So think super boring stuff like industrial safety or corrosion mitigation, industries that hadn't yet moved online. So in the 2010s, we had then had a dozen or so of these investments that were made, and started this. Actually, it was a family affair. I started with my wife Nicole, and at that point we had some money, and so threw more money at the problem, thinking we're smarter this time. We weren't, right? Like and like
just
okay,
more money.
I just had more money. You just burn things faster, right? And I wasn't spending 70 hours as like a 19-year-old kid writing financial terms. I wanted to hire people, right?
Yeah.
And so we were spending millions of dollars a year on content production, and I wanted to reduce those costs. So in 2015, approached some profs at the University of Alberta with the group that is now AMI, the AI Institute at the U of A. For a project around algorithmic content generation.
Okay.
So, so I didn't say Gen AI, the buzzword du jour, because that wasn't a term back in 2015.
Yeah.
In hindsight, we actually discovered that we were a bit early. The main technology advancement that has enabled these large language models, the tech that we see today, is called transformers. Wouldn't come for another few years. Mm-hmm. The running joke is that OpenAI and Anthropic have sort of, we were maybe $1 billion late on our project budget. So it was a colossal failure. But we had this amazing talent pool here, and we were losing like 95% of those. They're coming to Alberta, they're coming to Edmonton, and 95% of them or so were going to the US. Yeah. So I went to a guy named Jonathan Schaefer, Dr. Schaefer, who is the Dean of Science at the time, and said, every organization needs to lean into this, or is going to be leaning into this new AI thing, but you guys are really hard to work with. So what gives? And he said, well, we need a company focused on applied AI. So, we don't do research. We're not building these new models, but we're taking this existing tech and we're applying it to solve a business problem. Right. So that was and still is the thesis for AltaML, but that was the inspiration. Instead of hiring 2 or 3 entrepreneurs, we hired 4 or 5 and started off. And again, it kind of came out of it. My partner, Nicole and I then took this and, that was the start.
Ran with it. Wow. Well, we'll get into AltaML a little bit later. So after you sold Investopedia to the creation of AltaML, where you were just investing in different companies and overseeing that,
I figured, hey, I'm in Alberta, so I should probably know oil and gas. Mm-hmm. And so started learning the hard way of like, maybe I, made some investments in, you do the real estate thing, and was really just managing capital at the time. And frankly, still trying to find focus, right? Which I think is the story for a lot of entrepreneurs is you think you're done, I'll put that in air quotes, right? Like you've sold your company, okay, you're good. Yeah. And it took me a few years to realize that, as much as in the early days, you say, okay, I've read a lot of Warren Buffett. Well, it's, and you can be the Buffett disciple all you want, but it's a whole new learning curve to actually be a great investor and a great capital allocator. So let's say spent a lot of years learning lessons the hard way.
Ah, yes. Experience is the best instructor, right? Yeah.
Unfortunately, it doesn't matter how many books you read, right? Like,
oh, totally. Yeah. So, I mean, you've started now a couple of companies, you've invested in a lot. Like, what would you tell our listeners about that entrepreneurial journey? I mean, you've been a coach and a mentor, an investor, an angel, and so many, done your own. What is it, as someone thinking about that you would tell them this is what it's actually like, or these are the things that are going to set you up for success. What, as you look back on that teacher called experience, what foresight and wisdom can you tell people about that entrepreneurial journey?
It's a really good question. Sometimes I feel like I'm not equipped to answer it, to be totally honest. Like, I remember back in the day, we'd always joke about, man, we were really so dumb last quarter. And then you get to the next quarter and you go, we really weren't that smart, right? And then after a few years of doing that, you're like, maybe just being a little bit more humble and listening to the data, right, is the key, right? Like, I don't know that I've gotten any better at picking the right investments per se, but I have learned that being able to go in a smaller way and iterate quickly has, over the long run, when we've been in control and when we've done business with the right people that you can trust, over the long run, that's always worked out. And so, am I the right guy to do things passively and be an asset allocator? I think I've learned about my personal making that I'm really horrible at market timing. But I think being operationally involved and getting your hands in dirty there, I think I'm a very good capital allocator from that perspective, right? And so I think the main takeaway for myself is like learning at what your skill sets are and who you need to surround it with. That to me has been probably the most important part of the journey of just knowing when you're not good at something and knowing where to actually focus.
Yeah,
I can remember this. I can remember that I'm in a bunch of the YPO and EO and there's a group called Tiger 21. There's all these other sort of like kind of peer-to-peer groups for, and one guy at one point a few years ago, I was kind of like dabbling in a bunch of stuff and he's there and he's like, you're stagnant. What are you doing? You have no focus, right? Like, why are you putting money into these real estate investments or this? Like, you don't know squat about real estate. By the time you get a good real estate deal, me and all my buddies, we passed it over 6 months ago, right? You're a tech guy, make money in technology, take that tech and translate that back and forth, right? And so sometimes I think a little bit of success, we can get an ego and puts us in the wrong direction, thinking just because you've had success doing one thing, right? And also rode the right timing, right? And had that, right? So I like to be in businesses where there's really good multiples, right? And where if you can combine great operational excellence with being, the right vision and a strong team, and, we can't control the market, but if you get a little bit of luck there, well, don't try to force it into something that maybe where you're not the expert.
That's interesting because it's actually, from your vantage point, it's actually very different than something that one of your tech peers, Brad Zumwalt, has tried to really do. Is say lots of people have been very successful in oil and gas because they know the industry, they know the success metrics, they know how to evaluate a deal. How can we educate that group who has a pool of capital to then deploy into the tech? So he was talking a lot about how do I teach about good deal and investment metrics and characteristics for a new audience so that we can expand the pool of capital on tech. So
I guess what I'm saying is that, in that case, you need to surround yourself with the right people. So like he's one of them, and there's a number in the community. Like there's other BCA members, like a Derek Hunter comes to mind, right? Who's made that leap, who, if you can surround yourself with those type of people to be able to learn from that. And not saying it can't be done, right? But more saying that as I've figured out where I should focus my energy, right? If I'm going to be actually operationally involved, I know I'm not the right guy to run an oil field services company, right? Yeah, and and that's when maybe learning it the hard way.
Yeah. Good experienced teacher. What do you do as hobbies? What do you do outside the quote unquote office? And I know you are always running a mile a minute and doing so many different things and involved in volunteer capacities, including our board. So thank you for being involved with us. But what does Cory do if he's got some time, wants to do something to fill his cup? What do you often do?
There's this whole big thing around work-life balance, and I'm not so sure it's possible to be an entrepreneur and have good work-life balance. I was fortunate enough to sell a company and have young kids at the time and put in a ton of, I took off a bunch of time and we were raising the kids and really tried to be as present as I could to be the best father I could over those years. And so in my heart of hearts, I think that I did all that I could. I hope I did a good job there. I'm a travel and foodie guy, right? And so I look out Michelin restaurants wherever I go and maybe like fine wine a little bit too much. And so most everything is around travel and food. I should spend more time, and my favorite day would be waking up in backcountry skiing and going cat skiing somewhere. That would be my main areas. But I've gotten a lot of crap from the guys on my beer league hockey team that I've been missing all the hockey because they booked an ice time too early on Thursdays. And when you're running a company, you have to let some of that slide. So I'm probably not as balanced as I should be, but my kids are getting older now, and so I feel like I got time for another run in me, and that kind of means you need to do the 70-hour, 80-hour work week thing.
Yeah, well, that term work-life integration as opposed to.
Oh, is that the new term? I don't know.
That is the one.
There's always a new term for it. I haven't figured it out.
Yeah, that was a term that my friend, the late Jim Button, would always say, is that he would say, I don't believe in work-life balance. I believe in work-life integration. As an entrepreneur himself, who was one of the co-founders of Village Brewery and a few other initiatives. So
I had one experience with Richard Branson on Necker Island, right? Where we had with one entrepreneurship group that was there. And so I had some time with Branson, and he'd come in and join us for dinner, and then you'd see him out and he'd be playing chess, and then he'd be with a tennis pro, and then you'd look over and he's out kite surfing. And at one point I asked him, like, are you on vacation? Or are you working right now?
Yeah.
And he explained that he had never because of his dyslexia, he could never really be in an office. He couldn't really write. He wasn't good at that. He had to get really good at delegating and hiring great people and working around that. So he said, like, he was always completely present. I always remember this. He didn't have his cell phone up. He wasn't there. You felt like you had his time when it was there, but he would say, he'd go back off and do a few phone calls, and then the market would close or whatever in London. He'd be back and forth, right? And so, we've been trying to find that where can you still be present and focus on the things you really want, but have, I don't know, a mixture, maybe that integration, maybe that's the goal. I don't know. With where we're at right now, I'm the idiot that sold company, had nothing to do, had nothing onto it, and now I'm back into it. But you know what? Like, if you love the people that you're working with and you love your mission and what you're building, then it's not, it's like the cliche, not really work. I mean, it some days it doesn't feel that way, but as long as you're having fun doing it, that's the main thing. And I didn't have fun when I was a passive investor. Right. I wasn't happy. I wasn't we used to joke, well, I don't want to be around I don't want any employees. I just want to sit here with financial statements. And I think I wanted that to be true, maybe, back, a decade ago, but like I found that I was lying to myself. Right. And so if you can have a big vision and go out there and want to chase something, what matters to me is making a difference in our community. I want to change Alberta and this country. And I want to tie to some things in health and especially cancer. If you can do that and you can work on hard problems with really interesting people, to me, then that's the most satisfying thing. So maybe that's boring, though. I don't know. Maybe I need more hobbies. I'm trying to learn guitar. My 16-year-old son is now teaching me guitar. So it's kind of a cool experience to be taught by your kids. And so if you check in here, you can hold me accountable for that, right? I want to actually be a good Spanish speaker and a good guitar player, but like I keep on getting drawn back into balance sheets and code.
And raising funds and all those sorts of things. Yeah. Well, we'll check back in a year and see how your Spanish and guitar is going. But let's move to AI and AltaML. And so maybe paint us a broad picture of what AI actually is and where it's at today, and perhaps even what it's not and what people may be thinking it is. So
I would encourage executives to think of AI as simply a tool to improve business processes. Mm-hmm. At first, you're going to go in and just try to improve the way you're doing things. And then over time, perhaps totally reinventing processes. If you think of it in that simplistic term, hopefully a little bit more boring, I think you get rid of some of the fear. Mm-hmm. I think you get rid of some of the Hollywood Terminator-esque aspects around it. And you realize that it's this new technology that is literally just allowing us to run our businesses in a different way. And this might differ from some in the industry, and we could talk about AGI, or the general intelligence that people are so fearful of. I mean, we're not there right now, and maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't. And there's a whole debate that you can go into on that side of it. And I would point out that the people that are the biggest proponents of it often have financial incentives that are tied to it. And so there's a whole other discussion along that side. Yeah. But if you think about this as like, okay, I've got this, beforehand I had a screwdriver, now I've got a power drill. Okay, well, what can I do? How can I change that? And how can that change organizational design? That, I think, is the right mindset for the average executive.
Change organizational design.
Okay, well, and sorry, I'm mixing everything. So when we start thinking about tasks, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, right now, everybody's thinking about AI as I can automate this one process. Hey, we have, in our back office, we're processing this many insurance claims. Hey, we're making these quotes, right? And so certainly, yes, like AI can come in, and it's just an automation tool. It's just another tool, right? We're going to augment our team. We're going to augment a professional in this way to be able to do things that they couldn't do beforehand. Hopefully get rid of the stuff they don't like and see data in a different way that's not possible with our little human brains, right? Yeah. Where I think, and this kind of gets into, I think where we'll go with the discussion on agentic AI and some of the newer tech, some of the advancements that have come out, it's now getting to the point where what I'm seeing the most forward-thinking CEOs think about is how this might be not the biggest transformational tool that actually makes us question organizational design and really all of our assumptions about how we actually build corporations. So I'll give you one example. Like, we all kind of know you can only have 6 to 8 direct reports, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Like, why is that? Was it Drucker, or I don't know, was there someone else in the 50s that wrote some textbook that said like that, because we've built the modern corporation, this command and control on information flow.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. And so we've put all these systems in place because that's the only way we can get information bubbling up. And the larger the organization, the slower it is. And so much of organizational theory is around how to optimize that. But if you could eliminate that, if all of a sudden that wasn't a barrier, why would we design corporations in the same way?
That's a great point.
So take Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, right? It's widely publicized. Or have you heard of this? How many direct reports he has?
No, I haven't heard this.
60 plus.
Oh, wow.
Well, what an idiot, right? Well, he must be doing something wrong. Doesn't he know the rule is you can't have more than 6 to 8?
Yeah. So what does he do?
In creating the world's most valuable company, right? He sort of broke the mold because for years he's been using technology and thinking about how increased information flow can change the way you design things and change the way that you assemble teams. So we went down this whole rabbit hole here. How should we think of AI? Yeah, at first it's like, we can optimize our business processes. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Right. And then as you get further and further into it, as an organization has that AI literacy and the data literacy to say like, well, wait a minute, maybe we should question everything. Maybe we should question the very way that we're assembled. The best corporations in the world are now leaning in with that mindset. The best corporations and frankly, the best governments.
Yeah, good point.
Right. And so you see this, whether it's like examples within Estonia or examples in Dubai or Singapore, we're saying, well, wait a minute, why do we have to offer government services the same way we always did? Can't we, if we have now this whole new toolbox, can't we reinvent everything? So to me, that's what gets the most exciting. Like, how do we reinvent the healthcare system? How do we reinvent public sector? How do we reinvent corporations, right? And so we've had this movement from AI being this like, okay, well, the CEO says we have to do some AI. The board said we need to check this off to, wait a minute, everything can change.
Some real power here, yeah. What changed, Cory? Because, I mean, as we talk in May of 2026 here, it feels like in the past 12 months or so, give or take, AI was there, people were thinking about it, talking about it, but all of a sudden it has just exploded with ChatGPT and Gemini and Copilot and Claude. And like, what was the tipping point that just all of a sudden it is now everything and everywhere, and it's part of our washing machines and televisions, and everything you see is about being AI nimble and framing from an AI perspective? Was it a technology that all of a sudden exploded? Was it just a tipping point of critical mass? What happened?
It really is around this whole umbrella term of agentic AI, which, you can get into technical definitions where, a software solution that uses these large language models So the same type of underlying, engine that powers, say, like a ChatGPT, right, or a Claude Cowork, right? These LLMs are agentic AIs when you have a solution that uses these LLMs in a way where you can assign the software a task versus having to explicitly give it all the steps. And so we've started to see this now have you fooled around with any of the deep research tools, Adam? Have you used like Google Gemini Deep Research and that? So
I've used Google Gemini, but not necessarily deep research.
Right. You ever notice like when you're, and so you're actually using agentic AI when you ask it those questions of like, okay, I want to formulate a competitive analysis for where what other, I don't know,
business association
across North America and competitive set and help me run each other. You ever notice when you fill that out and then it says, thinking for a second, and it's assigning it, right? And it's using tools. So it's going out and hitting other websites, right? So that's tool use. So agentic AI can have tool use, right? Okay. And then multiple agents, these kind of like almost think these kind of building blocks of code can all work together. So there's an agent that's planning out that research mission. It's going out and using tools there. There's another agent in the back end that is grading the results of that and maybe saying, no, do this again or try back. And you can kind of see, I'll use think in air quote, right? When you're using those tools, right? Yeah. So what you're doing is that's one of the first times people are actually seeing agentic AI, right? Where software that you can assign a task and get that output of work is now fundamentally different. And so we started the start of this when we're using ChatGPT. Well, but even then, you're putting in a prompt and it gives you an answer back, right? Yeah. And sometimes that's good or sometimes that's bad, right? Yeah. Now we're seeing these entire systems of agents that can work together in a way that can solve problems that previously weren't possible. What's really interesting about agentic is that it has lowered the amount of data that's required to solve these problems.
Right.
So
talk about data quality, et cetera. Yeah.
Well, and you still need some data, right? But it's lowered the bar. So in, let's call it a classical machine learning world, so the olden days of 2 years ago, right?
Prehistoric times, yeah.
You needed to be a massive enterprise because every single model needed to be built from scratch. And so as you're going in to try to solve these problems, like you had to be massive. But now, because we don't need to build these models from scratch, because we're building on top of these sort of base models that Silicon Valley has spent billions of dollars investing in, it's now opened up the market. The entire mid-market and even smaller companies can now compete on a level playing field with enterprise.
Interesting.
It truly is a democratization of intelligence. If you use this as a proxy for, just give me that for the conversation, right? Like, like that, an intelligence and judgment, right? And it doesn't, if you had the smartest kid from MIT show up at your doorstep, they still wouldn't do, if they came to an analyst and you could afford them here at the BCA, like it'd still take them a couple months because you'd have to train them on our processes. You have to time in with your data. Think of it that way, right? We're now building these almost akin to virtual workers, right? But the cost of that is coming down, down, down. And so the problems that we can solve right now, it's increased by an order of magnitude what we can actually take on. Yeah. So that is the biggest thing in the last year that's changed.
Yeah, because it just all of a sudden just felt like overnight, right? Yeah, and I'm not a coder, but I'm now hearing that these agentic systems can then go in and actually write the code for you and create the output, which is...
And I'd be a little bit careful with that. So that's true.
Okay.
That's true. But this whole buzzword around vibe coding.
Okay.
Now, it was actually coined by a guy named Karpathy. He's one of the best known data scientists in the world, a co-founder of OpenAI, was the head of AI at Tesla. Like he knows his stuff, right? So he kind of coined the term. He's actually come up with a better term, I think, was our agentic engineering. So it is certainly true that a non-technical user can build something that it seems like science fiction, from scratch, right? Yeah. What I would propose is that most of the time when we've seen that, let's call it 65% of the way there. It looks pretty good on the surface, but then I haven't seen that many applications by a non-technical user that's been actually put into production. Think about how you scale that. Think about the security. Think about the debugging. Think about all these other things around software engineering, right?
Yeah.
But in the hands of the right engineer, it is absolutely game-changing. So I think of it in terms of these stories of people building something out. We've eliminated the whole initial phase for software development. Where it used to, you have to sit down and do these larger groups and then write up your product requirement documents and then back and forth with kind of mock-ups and this and that. Like the first month or two of any software project, or longer, depending on the size of your organization, was all spent in this time period. What we're seeing now is our product managers, our AI architects are sitting in client calls. We're then transcribing what they're hearing in real time, writing up the product requirements doc. I believe in the next few months, the way we're building software is we will have first prototypes done like within the next day or two.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
So think about how powerful that is. You're not giving proposals anymore. You're cutting out that.
Here's the actual product. Yeah.
Right. And I was in a meeting with my head of product in Toronto last week, and we were sitting in this meeting, and this is literally true. We were talking about the specific feature, and so as we were in the meeting, he started building stuff out. Again, he's got some technical knowledge here, right? And he's got there. Mm-hmm. And as we were going through this 45-minute conversation, near the end of it, he then flipped over his laptop and he said, "Okay, is this what you're thinking of? How do you like it?"
That's crazy.
Which is now like, I'm trying to get the point in my organization where that's the new standard operating procedure, right? Where if you're in a meeting, you should have a first version of it as you're going through, either, before you get there. I don't want PowerPoints. No one wants that. But what's powerful, but it's not like it's done at that point, right? What was powerful is then the subject matter expert on the other end, our client, said, "Well, I really like this. No, you got this wrong. You didn't get this here." But they had an intelligent conversation about the next revision. The number of software projects and the cost of the initial software development is going to go down 90%. Maybe it's down 99%, whatever you get bid on that.
Yeah.
What that's going to do is it's going to follow regular laws of supply and demand. Yeah. And it's going to mean, the cost is going to be down 95%, but the number of projects is going to be up 100x. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's such a fallacy that you don't need software engineers anymore, because you still need people that understand the architecture, that understand how things work together, that understand UX and bringing all these pieces together, right?
Yeah.
And I would argue that actually the job numbers actually bear this out. As of taping, there's more software engineers being hired than ever before. And I don't know, and I'm not getting, my software developers aren't asking for half as much. The ones that are using these tools, like, I'm now this much more productive, right?
Yeah.
I think the best ones are going to be paid almost like, maybe not like pro athletes, but like you're going to see this bifurcation where the best engineers aren't just 10x, they're 50x.
Wow.
That's where the world's going.
Yeah. So amidst all of the discussion around AI, there is fear of job eliminations and whole professions or occupations going by the wayside. Like, what, from your vantage point, what is true and what's myth in that conception?
I am anti-doomer. All these people talking negative about this usually, we used to selling papers, right? Now they're just trying to, looking for clicks. Now, clearly there's lots of opinions here, and people can talk about what might happen in the future, and none of us have a crystal ball, and so we can all speculate on that. Let's talk about where we are today. Again, taping is May 2026. Yeah. As of right now, the vast majority of surveys are not pointing to any job losses from AI. It's now been multiple years since ChatGPT came out, right? What's the unemployment in the US? Like 4.5%?
Yeah.
So will there be pockets where there's job losses? 100%. Customer service, over time, you'd think that'll go down. Over time, you'd think Uber drivers, if we get to autonomous driving, there's a lot of areas that are obvious that I think everybody understands. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the actual job numbers and all the studies, right? The US has the US numbers data, so I don't have the Canadian data per se, but like there's been more jobs created right now, and AI as of today factually has not killed jobs. We haven't seen this negative. And I would argue that that's been true throughout human history, right? If you take the techno-optimist side, and this is from a guy named Mark Andreessen for A16Z, the guy who invented the browser, Netscape, right? Yeah. He's probably one of the top venture capitalists in the world. They have this techno-optimist manifesto, which, frankly, is what I would point to as the right mindset. Technology is an enabler, and technology will make society better. Saying this time is different is a very dangerous statement, because it's never been true throughout human history. I like to think back to, imagine before the railway. Can you imagine the change in society when those inventions came? What about radio or air travel? And so is this change significant? Yes, this is as big as anything else we've seen, but we've seen many of these things beforehand. And to me, it just creates opportunity. If you come at it from the perspective as that we're building tools that help augment human performance, right? In aggregate across the economy, more jobs will be created, will be my guess. And we can fact check me on that in 2 or 3 years and we'll see. But
guitar in Spanish, yeah.
There's interesting examples, right? Like when you look across history, right? And I mean, people were really worried beforehand about this new horrible invention called the elevator.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Because you eliminated the jobs of the, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Or film.
Fax machines or...
Well, they're on film. I think go back, I mean, you can see the newspaper articles from the unions of all the bands that used to play beforehand when all of a sudden they put sound alongside moving pictures. Mm-hmm. What a horrible thing. Could you imagine getting right? So we all know the examples of like the telephone switchboard operator, but there's many other examples. And so being negative towards technology and being a pessimist has never worked out. And so at this point, I'm going to stay in the optimism camp and I'm going to see about how I can use technology to not just improve businesses and make everybody's back office run more properly. I think we can create $1 billion company doing that. Yeah. But then I want to apply it to healthcare. I want to apply it to the public service. I want to apply that to defense, right? And so to me, that gets really exciting about how that can improve the lives of Canadians and frankly solve what is our biggest issue is that we're completely lagging from a productivity perspective. Our kids are not going to have the same quality of life that we did unless we do something different. And that's something that every Canadian should care about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. As people are out there thinking about careers or job changes or professions and lots of pressure to be savvy using LLMs and other sorts of things like ChatGPT and cloud, like what do you tell the average person in terms of what they may want to do to be sort of fresh with AI or LLM skills or looking for the opportunities in the workforce? Youth unemployment's a big thing right now. Like, what would you be telling people that may make them think in the right career direction or more marketable in a world where we're using more and more of these tools?
We can't find the people to translate between business problems and the technical teams. Right? And so you can, again, I think there will be more software engineers. We'll see if I'm right or wrong. Again, because I think they're going to do way more. They're going to produce way more code. They're going to, the reason for that is there's going to be 100x the type of software projects. And so reducing the cost of that particular service is going to dramatically increase demand, will be my proposition there. But to have someone on the business side that understands return on investment, that understands strategy, that can take that and then communicate that back and forth, that's really tough.
Yeah.
And so if you're in business school, moving, like I always think of it as like a Venn diagram, right? We've kind of got the business savvy, the technical side, and then the subject matter expertise. As you can move into one of those other circles, right? So if you're in business, how can you be a little bit more technical? How can you be fooling around with like Claude Code and doing this in prototypes and then hanging out with engineers and getting their respect? If you're an engineer, how can you learn a little bit more about that subject? How can you know more about cancer diagnosis and go through? So as we get not generalists per se, but being able to go from that subject matter expertise to technical side and the business output, right? Those people, it's easy to find people that are just in their area, but to bridge that back and forth or to have that communication is very, very difficult.
Yeah. It's interesting. I like the way you put it, translators, right?
I mean, I describe my job. I just translate between executives and my technical team.
Yeah. That's a great segue to talking a little more about AltaML. So against all the backdrop of what we just talked about, AI, what it is and where it's going, what is the vision of AltaML and what do you do for clients, and what are some examples of things you have done or can do as part of your offering?
So we build vertical AI. So we build industry-specific AI. So think of us, if you contrast to the tools that people know, like that are horizontal in nature. So a tool like ChatGPT would be across every industry, and we don't think we can compete in that space. But applications that are maybe an inch wide and a mile deep, right, where we're taking this underlying technology and applying that with an organization's specific processes and their proprietary data, those type of applications are where we see the opportunity and where we think the next wave is coming in this tech. It's been interesting over the last couple of years because the other thing that's changed in agentic is that we're actually getting to these reusable components. And so a lot of people would perceive us saying, okay, well, on one extreme, you've got these kind of off-the-shelf kind of tools or agents. On the other side, you have like just a pure consulting company. Mm-hmm. And from day one, we've been trying to build a bunch of these reusable solutions. Now, frankly, in a classical ML world, it was very difficult to do, right? Because you couldn't get reusability from one organization to another.
Right.
That's now all changed with this new agentic AI. So we think that the software of the future is one where you have a proprietary platform, you have a bunch of these common building blocks, and then you customize for that last mile. Like you make it feel like bespoke software for a client, right?
Mass customization kind of thing.
Right? Well, exactly. So there still is that piece of it, right? So the company that's really proven out this model is Palantir, the big US tech firm, right? And I'm referring more to their way of developing. What's also changed over the last year or two is now there's an acceptance of this model, right? Silicon Valley didn't like this model beforehand. They said, oh, you're a services company, you're pure software as a service, you're pure SaaS, right? Mm-hmm. Again, interesting over the last week, both Anthropic and OpenAI have now raised billions of dollars, to go out and acquire these AI implementer companies. So essentially, that's what we do. We've been in the right spot. And so now the market's coming around that you're not going to be able to just get something off the shelf. So we play in that market where our long-term vision is very much along the side of some listeners might be aware of Constellation Software, the Canadian success story where I believe that we can create the next Constellation. I believe that if you can have the right financial structure, that holdco type structure where you're deploying capital, right, and building these applications, right, and Constellation has hundreds, thousands of companies they've acquired. We both build and so we think we can build that technology, and over time we think we can be the right acquirer. What's different now than the past and when Constellation started is you're seeing a completely different go-to-market with software. We think that in many instances that actually being able to infuse this AI software inside an organization will have better returns than just selling them software. Now, I'll give you an example there in legal. Yeah. So in the legal space, it's very difficult to sell to lawyers. And there are a few new entrants in that space, but basically Thomson Reuters has a project called Westlaw and LexisNexis. And there's a couple of guys that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars but selling research tool to lawyers, I've got some pain in that space. It's not easy. But I've yet to meet someone who likes paying by the billable hour.
Yeah.
And so typically right now you go to your law firm and say, oh, what's it going to cost? So it's going to be $200, $250K, I don't know. But we'll see. We'll see what it comes up to, right?
$1,000 an hour. Yeah.
Well, what if there was a law firm where that $200 and $250K quote was more, you know what? This is going to be $175K. I'll guarantee it's fixed price and I'll get it to you in a fifth of the time. And you still get to deal with your high-end lawyer at the onset. Again, this is one example of like every services, and I use this as an example because people can understand the billable hour with a law firm, right? But underneath the hood, you're going to see professional services firms that completely change the unit economics of their businesses, because if you take out 70 or 80% of the cost underneath, but you still have that human in the front end, you still have that professional that's there, it's going to transform the way businesses are built. We think that opportunity exists in all of professional services. Right. Any organization where you might have a sort of BPO, like business process outsourcing, right? Like, are ripe for that. And it really ties into this idea of like, can you be a better investor? The next Constellation, the next Berkshire Hathaway will be built, I believe, by a company that infuses AI within organizations and continually improves them, right? And figures out the adoption and the tech so that every company will be a tech company from within, right? But they're not going to be buying software from Silicon Valley, right? And so we think we can be the company that does that. And I think you can build a generational type business. I genuinely believe you can build the next Berkshire.
Wow, that's an amazing, compelling vision. Berkshire is a pretty significant North Star.
Well, I hope so. I need to get a few more wins under my belt. I just need to find enough, the key with Berkshire is that you got to get enough permanent capital. And so we're going to keep on doing, like, again, right now, we think we've got, again, a mini Palantir that we have here. And there's a lot of opportunities in Canada, and especially with what's going on in sovereign compute and the rest of that. We think we can scale up, working with clients in a big way over the next while. But over time, and where there's the right fit, we can also go in and invest off our balance sheet or be a truly invested partner. That's where we've really differentiated. I can't compete with the Accentures of the world, and I can't sell that better, right? Regardless of what level of services, what level of tech. I can't compete against the hyperscalers. I don't want to play in that game, right? But if we can be the best blue collar AI company in the world, transforming traditional industries, and where there's that right situation, kind of like lean in and align on financial incentives, I think the market's ready for that type of a model.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask, like, other characteristics of the segments you think are right for this. Is it size of company, industry, certain kind of offerings, et cetera? Like, is there...
My biggest, if I knew the perfect use case and my team gives me crap for this all the time, right? Because like you can't play everywhere. You've got to specialize. And so the winner will have more focus. I'll say more for company size. We have a lot of enterprise clients and we value them, and we continue to work with them, both enterprise and public sector side. But I'll say that the path to selling enterprise software is a difficult one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Number one, because it's hard to work within big enterprise. Everyone knows that. And, often you have your champion and they last for a few years. And when they're gone, then you're out. And often they're trying to build internally and so forth, right? With this change, with less data required, the whole mid-market is now wide open. So I believe there's going to be 250 to 500 person engineering firms that, as they implement agentic AI and are truly AI first within their organization, are going to feel like 1,000 or 2,000 person firms. So I think there's going to be massive job increases with these smaller, more nimble firms.
Right.
And you will see losses in the large enterprises that really can't adapt, whether that's because they don't have the right leadership or whether it's just difficult when you're such a large organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also when I'm talking to those people, those CEOs, they're moving quick. It's not a year-long sales process. It's like a 2 to 4 week decision, and you're moving in. Now it's smaller contracts, all the rest of it, but like we really like that space, and we think we can be best in the world at the mid-market.
Well, I imagine you will be. I believe you will. So, closing out on this section, Cory, like what, as an executive, is thinking about what to do with respect to either the big term of AI or agentic or machine learning? What do you encourage every executive to be thinking about, and some of the decisions they should be making about bringing this tech into their operation?
Happy to have a larger conversation for those that want to do so. But to make a succinct answer, I'm going to actually steal from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, when he was asked the exact same question at an event I was at back in May. And his advice, which I think is what every executive should do, is to talk to your 24-year-olds. AI is already being used in your organization. The problem is, it's like the old days of bring your own device, right? It's like bring your own AI. So I can guarantee you that every single BCA member, that any listener for this, anybody of any size, your team's using a bunch of these tools, but they're doing it in a way that is probably not secure. Your data is probably leaking out to a bunch of these big tech firms, right? You have a data and a privacy issue, right? You also have a governance issue because you're not really observing how those models are worked, right? And it's not being shared across the rest of your team.
Right.
So having a conversation about how people are using it, if you're early on in your AI journey, is really powerful because those are the use cases that you're going to have the least friction on. It's all about the people. The tech is there.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you identify those champions within they're going to be the early adopters that then start working on something that might not be perfect, that get the feedback to continually improve those applications to build out? The second thing I would say after you talk to those 24-year-olds is, should we use these productivity tools? And every large vendor is selling some form of productivity tool. And should we be using these? Of course we should. But don't think that these productivity tools and the off-the-shelf tools are going to transform your organization. Right?
Yep.
And I'm not going to get in trouble here because I work with many of the larger hyperscalers, right? I'm not going to name any specific products, but like I think like back to the 90s when you first got your BlackBerry.
Yep.
You're like, I am the coolest executive on the block. I saw those investment bankers in New York, and they're like, and I got email on my phone. And that was an edge for like a month.
Yeah.
Well, think of it the same way. If all your competitors are using the same tools, how is that going to actually differentiate your organization? You need to look through it, and you need to do the hard work of saying, we're going to look at all of our processes. We're going to bring together the subject matter experts alongside with our internal teams to be able to say, how do we actually apply this new tool to our strategy with our data set in our private cloud? That's going to be true transformation, right? Building that in that way is how you're going to see organizations, or the organizations that do that, I think are going to be completely different than those just say, hey, you know what? I bought some product here, check, my board's going to get off my ass for the next quarter.
Yeah. So where do Alberta and Canada sit in terms of the global competitive AI race? Both from we know University of Alberta is well regarded as an institution for talent. And I know we've talked in the past that is eroding over time, but where do Alberta and Canada sit in this global AI race for company and talent development?
There's two sides to this question. Historically, most of the underpinnings of what we're talking about here were actually developed in Canada. Mm-hmm. So deep learning was developed in Toronto, Montreal. Dr. Jeffrey Hinton, Yoshia Bengio, Yan LeCun, who's now in New York, but won the Nobel Prize for it. So the pan-Canadian AI strategy is Toronto, Montreal, and Edmonton, right? And Dr. Richard Sutton in Edmonton. So we've got these amazing institutions that are magnets of talent, bringing people from around the world coming here to study. So that's a huge advantage. Yeah. So I think from that side of it is great. But we're getting our butt kicked on the commercialization side. Mm. Two of those profs worked for Google, basically got hired away by Google, right? Yeah. Most of the IP is flown out. We're huge proponents of the Council of Canadian Innovators and their message that IP needs to stay in Canadian hands. We need to have control over the data, right? And so I would say that it's still not too late. We can still move in. The more and more, and there's this discussion around sovereignty, especially on the defense side of things. There's an opportunity here to really lean and say, how do we make sure that we've got everything lined up from, and I don't think government's the answer on the capital side per se, but we like to pretend like like the US is like this free market capitalism at Friedman. It's just simply not the case. Like there's so many US firms that have got started off with procurement, right? Yeah. And especially spending money from a defense perspective, right? Yeah, the whole internet was created based on it, right? We need to lean in and actually have procurement as a vehicle. That's not going to solve everything, right? But in many industries, that's going to be a key piece here to be able to actually build Canadian AI. So build AI here that can have our values, right? So we're not just outsourcing our talent and becoming the farm team and then having to buy back what they create at higher prices, right? Mm-hmm. We have to control our data, right? And we have to build IP that stays in Canadian hands, right? So as a country, we still have an opportunity there. Our report card on that hasn't been great to date.
Mm. So what policy or programs or incentives do we need to put in place to seize the commercial opportunity? Is it procurement? Is it IP? Is it data? Is it all of the above?
I think it's all above. And I mean, you've done some good work. I mean, on the IP side, there's a whole bunch around IP of just awareness of it. And I think there's some good motions happening there. But I'll maybe tie it to procurement as the example. I'll bring an example locally here in Alberta. We've got this unique data set because there's one health authority, or there's been one health authority over the last decade or so, where this should be one of the best sandboxes on the planet to create AI for or in health.
Yeah.
But it's basically closed off. We do work with Alberta Health Services, or the former Alberta Health Services, right? And we've done some work in the various areas. It's very, very difficult to break through because we come forward with a view of privacy trumping all. And no one's here trying to take data and sell it off to everybody else, but you can set up policies that destroy all innovation.
Yeah.
And there's no sandbox where we actually allow startups to come here and build. So what you see happen with companies in the health space in Alberta and across the country is you'll have great talent here, great engineering, a great idea, and you won't be able to get your first client locally. And then you try to go to Texas, you try to go to California, and they go, well, shouldn't your reference client be in your own backyard? So we've got these data assets, but we don't do a good enough job of creating the right structure where there is a balance. There is a way to have safe, ethical use of this data, right? But actually supporting and leaning into supporting the Canadian tech ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so health is a great example because, I mean, many other, there's lots of other success stories in tech that don't require that. But in the case of AI, that's the biggest opportunity. And we're still talking like 35, 40% of the economy here, right? The only way we're going to fix our healthcare system, we can't throw more money at doctors and nurses that we don't have more money, right? We can't cut our way towards it. We need to make better decisions. I would argue the same is true in defense. If we want to have sovereignty, and if we're going to protect Canadians, those are other areas. So those are two big opportunities within AI that the right policies, the right leadership to actually support the ecosystem here would make a dramatic difference and could create tens of thousands of jobs overnight.
So if you had the Premier and the Prime Minister sitting in front of you, what would be your asks?
That would be an interesting table at the same table. Wow, at the same table.
After they finish signing the MOU, you can then talk to them about AI.
I think it would be exactly this. I say creating the right, not picking the winners. In Alberta, we don't pick the winners. And I would argue in Canada, we shouldn't pick the winners. But if you look at, in some ways, the Chinese have actually done better at this in a communist system that embraces competition. So in almost every market, what a lot of people aren't even aware of is that as there's an industrial policy that says we're going to be the best in the world at this specific area, whether that's solar panels or what, right? There's an industrial policy, and we should have industrial policy. We should have some vision for where we can be best in the world in our economy. They create a sandbox where you can have competition and let the best fight it out.
Yep.
And as you use the market and have that lever, but at least it's opened up to local participants. And as the best works it out, then obviously, I think there's more state control there, which I would say not that side, right? But couldn't we here have the ability where we actually create those sandboxes where we say, here are the problems we need to solve, right? And we're going to lower the procurement barriers so we actually can solve this if you truly are Canadian owned and you're going to work with it and you're going to keep, and you're going to check the box on a bunch of the sovereignty elements of it, right?
Yeah.
Because right now what we do is we just say, like, well, we've got all these free trade agreements and we have to be safe and we have to do this. And like, we're so humble, like we're not playing the same game that the rest of the world is, right? And so big US firms come in and take all the contracts.
Yeah.
So in every single government, it doesn't matter, municipal, provincial, and federal, the vast majority of tech budgets are going out to foreign multinationals. That's just a fact. So why not create that and allow that to create here, not picking the winners, not from some sort of weird corruption or regulatory capture, whatever, right? But create the right platforms where you can have competition, but at least let us be at the same level as these big foreign multinationals. Because right now we just get squashed.
Yeah. Cory, we always like to end on a positive note about Alberta and the opportunities. What's your view about Alberta? Are you bullish, you bearish? And where do you see the real potential for this province in the coming decade?
I've never been more bullish on Alberta. I feel like Calgary is the best place to live in this country. I feel like there's a new energy that's coming to this province. And that's said from an Edmontonian. I mean, you got to give me some credit with that, right? I love Edmonton, right? When you look at what we have, what we're building in this province here, I'm optimistic with the actions the Premier's taking. And I do believe that we can create a new relationship within Confederation. And I think that as we can take the culture of risk-taking and entrepreneurship that we have here, I think that we can create, through this new relationship, creating the right regulatory regimes and creating the right platform is wrong, where I'm getting kind of tech geeky on this, right? But like, by having the lowest taxes in the country and hopefully, further getting to some of the lowest taxes in North America, right? Yeah. By marshaling our own capital to be able to actually create other pools of capital where more investors move here, by using the regulatory regime to be able to make it so this is a great place for fintech or for insurance, right? And leaning into our post-secondaries and continuing to fund the post-secondaries for the technologies of the future that then will create the engineers and create the professionals that come out. I think we're as good as anywhere in North America. There's just a few things we need to kind of put together to make sure we have the right level of control, right? And I think all we're looking for, as long as we get the same rights as other provinces, right? I think we can continue to be the economic engine for this country. And I think we can be the best place in North America and frankly, then the best place in the world to start a business. I truly believe that we have that potential if we can get rid of a few things that, you do such a good job, and we're not going to get into at the end. There's nothing but reasons to be optimistic.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. That's why I do what I do. And so I want to say thank you for joining us. This has been a fascinating conversation. I frankly wish we had more time because there's lots more that I want to dig into on AI and ML. So we'll have to do that another time. But Cory, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for everything you do, and thanks to the team of the BCA. It's just an amazing organization. And I got to put in one plug. If you're listening to this and you're not a BCA member and you run a larger organization in this province, you need to reach out, because we need all organizations in this province to be members, and I'll be singing from the same songbook. So thanks for what you do, Adam.
Thanks, Cory. You've been listening to C-Suite Unplugged. As always, it's a privilege to spend some time with the leading executives of our membership. Thank you to our guests this month for sharing their journey and insights. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to review and share the podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time with more unfiltered leadership stories from the C-Suite.